as an individual grappling with this and their own suffering and difficulties and wanting to change and, progress, as we all read this stuff because there's something inherently unsatisfactory about experience at the end of the day, right? Not just because we like to think, but because we're, essentially not satisfied with what's going on. And, and people watching this will have the same experience and be asking, well, how then does one grapple with one's own karma if, like cause and effect, a whole long chain that is already determined, like you're talking about awareness. Is that a way to break the chain? And, and why bother in the first place if the self is always over here, completely fine and happy? What's going on down here that's completely controlled? And how does one get from one thing to the other?
I mean, these are really good questions. And I think
I hope so.
My understanding of the my reading of Samkhya would suggest that whether or not you turn to spirituality, whether or not you seek a spiritual means to relieve yourself of your suffering, because most people are seeking ways to relieve their suffering, the things that they're not happy with in life, whether it be through earning more money or drinking or taking drugs or hiding in, relationships or hiding even in spiritual practices. Whatever it is one happens to be doing is, according to this system, as I understand it, is as a result of nature. So whether or not you end up seeking to relieve your suffering through spiritual means or through investigative means has got nothing to do with you. It's an impersonal happening, which is as a result of the turnings, the vrittis of the gunas, which might be kind of unsatisfactory for somebody wanting to have an answer.
Or wanting to take personal volition to change something. I mean, what are we doing? And then it's like, we come back to the kind of conversation we had previously. It's like, well, what are we doing in yoga in the first place if you're trapped by your own karma? And it will be as it is when you're born, sets off a cause and effect. You can't do anything other than what's set off. Why bother doing anything then is a classic kind of question, isn't it?
Well, that's it. And because you can't not do it would be the answer. It's not my answer, but it's the answer that would be my reading of what Samkhya would say, or even somebody like what Ramesh Balsekar would say. You can't not do what you're doing. And if you do something else, well, that's because that's also what you're meant to be doing.
And this idea about yoga kind of purifying, right? You have it in the Gita that it's there for clarification of consciousness and kind of concentration, the physical practice of yoga. I mean, we know it's also used tantrically for kind of purifying the energy of the body. Later on in the chapters, I think it starts to become like talked about in this manner, like the body is the field and the energy in the body, the faith in the body is embodied. That the one's belief state is embodied in the physical body. Is this something you would subscribe to? This idea that yoga, the behavioural action, does actually have a transformative effect on one's own karma and one's own awareness?
I think it can do, depending upon where it's coming from. If it's coming from, the ego can co-opt everything. So if it's an ego ambition to become a purer being in order to be more spiritual, then from the outset, it's not going to work because any action. Well, this is to quote Yuji Krishnamurti. Just comes to my mind. He said, "Any action born of the mind is violent." So any action born of the ego is violent. So my understanding of the yoga process is that at each stage, there's a deepening surrender of ego to go deeper. But of course, what's the thing about surrendering the ego is the ego can't surrender the ego. So then we come back to a notion of there being some kind of grace or surrendering that happens, or even it's like I guess like the Zen way is that the mind gets so caught up in trying to answer a question that can't be answered that eventually it gives up. And I think this is what the process of samadhi actually is. When they talk, or sannyasa is whenever you get insights on certain levels, it's because you focused on something so completely that the mind dissolves into it. And I think that's really what the process of yoga and Sankhya is that meditation on something so completely that the ego is dissolved.
Is that what you would
as a result of that, insight is generated?
You kind of would suggest that's what we're doing in a physical practice. If we're trying to kind of make a kind of synthesis between Samkhya and the physical idea of yoga, or even the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, the yoga of action. How do they relate together?
Well, what Krishna says to Arjuna is that the yoga of action is exactly the same as Jnana Yoga. The Sankhya that he's calling is exactly the same as outside yoga in the world. Whenever you relate to it, the yoga in the world as you relate to it is action done, which already has that awareness of who you truly are. And of course, Arjuna doesn't get it, so he keeps giving him new ways of looking at it. And eventually, he just says, you love me, right? Well, then do it out of love for me, because that's as close as you're going to get.
So
I don't know that. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Well, no, we're not looking for answers. We're just looking for a chat, aren't we? But I mean, no, we're getting some good stuff here. And don't worry. I mean, what about Bhakti then? Because essentially we have Jnana Yoga, very similar to Samkhya. The process of knowledge, even if we take out the yoga part, which you're suggesting that Samkhya is yoga. And then in the Gita, we seem to have a slight polarity. We have yoga, which is kind of Bhakti. Deeds are done and practices are done for the sense of knowing me, knowing Krishna. No, right? So you have your yoga, which is kind of an action, a fruitless action, or not a fruitless action, but an action without desire for a particular conclusion, done for the sake of devotion. And then you've got Jnana Yoga, which is a process.
So that would be also yoga practice. Would be so whenever you take the goal out of it. Like the goal of being an enlightened person, the goal of being a better person, the goal even of getting rid of your suffering. Then it's yoga, according to Krishna. But as long as yoga is a project of ego to get from A to B, to get somewhere, according to Krishna, it's not yoga, because there's no vairagya. What is vairagya? Vairagya means coming out of raga, and raga is desire. So if you have a desire for enlightenment, and you're using whose enlightenment? It's only the ego wants to be enlightened, because it sees this idea that it can attain something. It can attain the one thing that will make it better than everybody else. Well, it's another thing that Ramesh Balsekar said. He said, if you have a choice between $1 million or enlightenment, take the $1 million, because somebody will be there to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Enlightenment, you're not there. There's another one. There's a really nice scholar who I like. He's called Lloyd Pfluger, and he's the one whose position most closely resembles my own on this subject. And he says it's like spiritual dentistry. That you think you have a toothache, so you go to the dentist, and instead of him pulling the tooth, he pulls you out. So the tooth remains, but you are gone.
What about the process of bhakti then? How does that inform your practice? I mean, if we're talking about ego-less, we're talking about devoting the self or the ego, or devoting to something other than our own ego, devoting to something other than us. I mean, is that relational to this quantifying of real and non-real? How does that fit in?
Well, it's, like in terms of my practice, like on a good day, there's observation, and what the observation brings is an awareness of how the ego runs through habitual grooves, and the act of observation disturbs the running of those habitual grooves and can open up another space, which of course can then be again co-opted by ego. As far as bhakti goes, there's in terms of Sankhya, and I would suggest yoga as well, there's not a lot of mention of bhakti. So the bhakti movements developed as a separate religious cult, whether it was for Vishnu or for Shiva. But essentially, what is bhakti? Bhakti is love, and whenever you do what you love, for the love of doing it, whatever it happens to be, if you love singing and you sing just for the love of singing, and not to gain attention, not to gain,
I mean, is this the ultimate view of Samkhya? Yeah, I mean, would that be the ultimate view that Samkhya's taking? Because that would seem unsatisfactory to many that are kind of looking for an overarching metaphysical viewpoint, right? I mean, I think you talked about this before, that just simply the doing for the sake of it. And it's just like, well, that for me, you contemplating my own death in a few years, doesn't, it's not kind of a salute. Well, could be now, could be tomorrow, could be, in 20. But the main point is that if not now, tomorrow, or if not tomorrow, sometime soon. And, at the end of the day, that doesn't seem adequate for me. That, just doing and making hay while the sun shines, as I said to someone else. And they said, well, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And for me, that isn't adequate. I want some kind of metaphysical kind of ontology here. And chapter 2 of the Gita, turns it out nicely, right? You have this process of reincarnation, and you're going on this whole journey, and you're not going to, there's a
but
do you need? I suppose my
the
question,
second
if I
chapter
just
of the Bhagavad Gita is, it's the chapter on Sankhya Yoga. So underlying that metaphysics is the question: well, who is transmigrating? And it's the gunas, and it's that motion of cause and effect. And the only way out of that is to realize that one is not the doer. I mean, according to my understanding of the Gita and the philosophical systems that underline that chapter, is we don't have a choice. And what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And if we're looking for peace, the only way towards getting that is by surrendering to where we find ourselves. And that doesn't preclude having wanting to do things in the world, or it doesn't preclude having actions in the world, just as it doesn't preclude Arjuna from going out onto the battlefield and slaughtering thousands of people. But presumably because as Krishna's telling him, because he's in touch with who he really is in the process of doing that.
It's a great excuse, isn't it? Right. Yeah. You can really do what you want as long as you know that you're not really the doer.
There's always a way.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic, isn't it? It's a fantastic. I mean, on a serious note, though, I've always wondered: does the yoga idea make any sense whatsoever if you take out the idea of reincarnation? If you take out the fact that there isn't really an individual as we know it going forward, okay, maybe there's some aggregates or something, or some kind of interdependency that goes forward, but if you take out that individual sense of self, does the whole proposition make any sense to devote, because yoga's always been. I mean, it's always been transcendental as a metaphysical expose, going out of the world to something greater, right?
I mean, for me, if you take reincarnation out of it, it's absolutely fine, because
right.
Reincarnation at the end of the day, unless, I don't know, you're able to access your own bardo and, have the experience of your past lives, it's just a belief. And for me, what yoga is pointing towards is that which is beyond belief. The definition of yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, it's the stopping of the turnings of the mind, and all of the beliefs that we have are turnings of the mind. They're all narratives and stories that we carry with us. So all of our beliefs and all of our creeds are absent.
Why the hell, as Ramesh said, as Ramesh Balsekar said to you, or you heard, why the hell would you want to do that? If there isn't reincarnation, why would you not want to be an individual? And even actually, at one point, Krishna says to Arjuna, "Go out and enjoy the victory, right? You'll be celebrated, right? Go and slaughter, right? And it's like go to, if we take out if we take out the transcendental from the equation, then why the hell would you want a chitta vritti? That just would seem like wasting the gift you've been given in a way, unless there's something other to be found in this in this scenario of life.
So I'm not sure what you're saying there, Adam. Are you saying
well, take the $1 million.
Oh, you're saying why?
Well, why? Yes.
Why would we seek?
Why would you seek to stop the individuality in the mind rather than take the individual as an individual with his $1 million or whatever experience he's enjoying, and continue along that path?
And the spiritual texts all start from the same place. So when Arjuna,
well, even Plato does. Let's be frank.
Well, they start from the same place in that. So Arjuna, his first place is despondency. He's there on the battlefield, and his mind is whirring like crazy, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's suffering. And the same in the Sankhya Karika is the second. I think it's the second verse says, because of the suffering of the world, because of the suffering of the three kinds of afflictions, we seek cause for their remedy. And I know Vyasa's commentary on the Yoga Sutras begins with the same place. We've tried everything else to try to remove our suffering, and nothing's worked. So
now starts yoga.
So that's his introduction to the word Atha Yoga Anushasan. Now that we've tried everything else, now Atha Yoga Anushasan. Now the discipline of yoga. And that's why we get into it, is because we're not happy, and nothing that the world has to offer us really satisfies. We had Buddhism starts from the same place as well. Because of suffering that we seek, because we know that inherently the outside world is impermanent and unsatisfactory. But what we're not realizing is that at the core of that suffering is ourselves as mistaken ego identities. So it's almost like there's a kind of suicide button in spirituality, because the very self that goes seeking is the very self that would be removed if the spiritual search is to be successful. Although
there's an actual suicide button in Brahmanism and Jainism. They would obviously self-immolate quite often or starve themselves.
That's right. That's the highest spiritual practice.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Go back to the idea of the duality. I mean, does it make any difference that Samkhya is a dual system in terms of, as I mentioned before, I kind of wanted to circle back to that again. You often talk about this, in more kind of advice terms, and this is what is. This is, I do something because I enjoy it, right? And then there's this, real and unreal paradigm, fleshed out in the whole yoga philosophy. Is there any difference to you as a practitioner? Or put it in a very basic way, what is it exactly you're aiming for? Is it transcendence, going forward, or is it just an imminent sense of awareness right now? I mean, what are you doing?
Well,
you personally.
What am I doing as a practitioner? What am I
doing?
I have no idea. This is what keeps me going.
I was hoping you were going to tell me.
Sustains me in my life. No, I mean, I really wish I knew. It's a mystery to me. Obviously, there's lots of very good reasons why to do practice. It keeps the body healthy. It can take the mind off other things. But if I was hoping for anything, it would be to accept what is. And I don't really see that practice is going to do that for me. It's gonna happen or it's not gonna happen. It happens in some moments and it doesn't happen in other moments. And so we're here watching the unfolding of life.
So you don't subscribe to the idea of the method that Krishna gives for yoga as that sit in a comfortable place and then focus your mind. And if you can't do, if you're unable, he says, Krishna, to Arjuna, if you're unable to really focus, then you use the tool of yoga. And would you agree with that? I mean, from what you're saying, it suggests that there's really no good reason for modern postural yoga as we know it, as we both.
There's lots and lots of good reasons for it, but I'd say that the main one that it aims towards, or the main one that it goes under the guise of, which is spiritual enlightenment or spiritual fulfillment, I don't think it cuts the mustard in terms of being able to lead practitioners to that place. But for sure, there's lots of great reasons to practice. I'm 45 now, and I can do things with my body that 20-year-olds can't do, and so I'm in good health, and it's earning me a good living, and I've got a great lifestyle. These are all great reasons to do yoga. I enjoy it, and it also gives me a platform and an opportunity to share things that I love, which is like philosophical inquiry and mythology and chanting. It's a rich culture. I mean, it's an incredibly rich and beautiful culture. But a culture is a culture at the end of the day. And just because a culture happens to talk about the space beyond culture, it's still a culture talking about the space beyond culture rather than actually being beyond culture. Being in the state of enlightenment or whatever you want to call
it. Don't think I have anything more to expand on that, really. It also sounds quite dry though, but it sounds quite material though. Still, it's like, well, it gives me health and it gives me money, and I don't know, something.
I'm sure there's moments as well.
Yeah. It's like, well, there's
the
many
mind
things.
Calms down. It can give temporary respite from the pull of the disturbances of the world. Yeah, for sure it can do all that. But the world's not going away. And, if you want a guru, the world is your guru. Yoga can be a really great place to take respite and gird your loins to face another day. But, life is going to come a knocking. And life is going to see how much of a yogi you really are.
Yeah, if we haven't got any free will anyway, then it will. We're kind of left with a kind of stalemate of just answering what it will be as it is, really, and
Well, I think where I ultimately come to with it is, I'm an agnostic. Can I know whether we have free will? No, I have no idea at all. Can I know whether everything's determined? No, of course I can't. I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. But I know that the concepts have been very useful for me when life has come a knocking strongly, and I've been able to view it from a perspective of all of this being God's will, cosmic law, or events happen, deeds are done, consequences happen, but there is no individual doer thereof. It's definitely, these concepts have helped me to surrender more to the flow of the ocean of life, and to, rather than putting up a strong barrier, trying to hold back the tidal wave of life, I've been able to surrender to it a bit more. So I think, if anything, these concepts can be useful, but at the end of the day, they're just concepts.
Well, I think they inform and enrich one's own, whatever one's own behaviour is, whether it's physical, social behaviours in the world, or physical, personal behaviours in terms of bodily gestures. I think they kind of inform and enrich that whole process, and doing yoga or living in the world without any kind of framework in which to kind of wrangle with. I mean, we're not necessarily accepting the framework of Samkhya, but it gives a good something to kind of joust with. As I say, food for thought. Is enriching, and hence why I keep doing these little chats.
Yeah, I think Samkhya is incredibly enriching, and it doesn't get the kind of good press that it deserves. People think that it's a very dry.
Well, it's a bit cooler to be a more Advaita these days, isn't it? Everyone's Advaita.
Always.
They're not exactly.
But I think when you get to the pinnacle of both of them, they're almost indistinguishable from one another.
It's a topic for a future chat. But really, it's been a pleasure to have you, Luke, and thanks for.
That's a really nice talk, Adam.
Yeah, some really interesting and a lot of stuff to consider on the back of that. Thank you.
Okay.
Lovely to have you.
Thanks.